Hi, everyone. My name is Gargi Sahani, and I'm an associate professor at Auburn University and a researcher at ResponsePy. I've spent the last few years researching survey fraud and data quality issues. So I wanted to put together a quick session to walk through what survey fraud really is. I think at this point, most researchers are aware that survey fraud exists, but oftentimes it's treated as a single uniform problem. My goal today is to talk in more detail about what survey fraud really is and what are the different types of fraud that we tend to see in online surveys. So, when we talk about survey fraud, we're really talking about people intentionally trying to manipulate their responses or misrepresent themselves, usually to get into a survey or to receive some type of a compensation or incentive. The key idea behind survey fraud is that fraud is intentional and there is some form of deception that's involved. There are a few things to note on this slide. One, survey fraud is not just one thing. There are a variety of different types of fraud. And two, fraud has evolved over the years. I've been using online surveys for over a decade now. And when I first started using online surveys, fraud existed back then as well. However, fraud looked very different from what it looks like today. So let's talk about the different types of fraud. On the left-hand side, you'll see what I'd call more traditional issues with survey fraud. These are speeders, people who are just rushing through surveys with very little effort, or misrepresentation, where someone is essentially lying about who they are so they can qualify for a survey. Then you have cases like multiple accounts, which is still one individual, but now they're taking the survey multiple times under different identities. So the behavior in this case tends to be a little more intentional, even though we're still dealing with that one individual. When you move to the right, you'll start to see more of a coordinated effort in survey fraud. So here we have survey farms or click farms, as they're sometimes called, which are really just groups of people that are working together. They're following shared instructions, completing surveys at scale. And then at the very far end, you have AI powered responses, AI powered fraud, which is a newer type of fraud that we're seeing more of today in online surveys. So, with AI powered frauds, responses aren't coming from humans at all. Rather, these are being generated by systems that can provide very human like responses. So, the key idea here is that these different types of fraud pose different types of problem, and they reflect how survey fraud has evolved from an individual behavior to more of a coordinated effort to more automated systems, AI powered fraud. So let's do a deeper dive into what these different types of fraud looks like. So the first type of fraud are our speeders, who are really just respondents trying to complete surveys as quickly as possible with minimal effort, minimal attention. These respondents can be careless, so they can click through items without even reading them. They can be inattentive, so they're responding to items without fully understanding the instructions. They may engage in straight lining behavior, which is selecting the same response option across multiple items consecutively. And lastly, they may engage in random responding or selecting responses at random across survey items. Then we have misrepresentation. The core idea behind misrepresentation is that it involves intentionally providing false or exaggerated information so a participant can qualify for a survey. So they can do this in different ways. One, they may create fake profiles using uh, they're essentially inauthentic profiles so they can qualify for different surveys. They may provide false demographics, so they may lie about their age, location, their gender, um, their industry, occupation, just so they can meet the screening criteria. They may also provide inflated responses. So they may exaggerate their behaviors from the past, their experiences, their qualifications, even. So, an example may be that they could claim to use a product very frequently just so they can take a survey. They may provide bogus responses. So, they may provide fabricated, random, non genuine responses to survey items. Another form of fraud is multiple accounts. The core idea here is one individual may create or use multiple identities to complete surveys multiple times. So they may create duplicate accounts where they're registering several profiles with different email addresses, for instance. They may use global VPNs such that they may log in from different IP addresses so they can bypass any geographic restrictions that your survey may have. They may also use fake identities, so they could use different names, different demographics, different profiles, just so they appear as unique participants. Then we have survey farms or click farms, which are essentially four things. These are groups of people that use devices. There's a coordinated effort and there's volume. So, one way of thinking of survey farms is that it's human labor organized to operate like a production system. So, I mentioned survey farms can include groups of workers, which are really just many individuals that are simultaneously trying to complete surveys. There are many devices and accounts that are involved, so they can simulate numerous unique respondents. It's a coordinated effort. So participants may share instructions, tactics to qualify for different types of surveys and complete them. And there's typically a high volume. So you may see several surveys being completely simultaneously in a short period of time. Um, Lastly, we have AI powered agents, AI agents, automation, which is our newer form of fraud. So the idea here is that AI agents are able to interpret questions. They can maintain consistency as they're responding to different items. They can adapt in real time. They can provide responses that look very human-like. These agents are really good at parsing items. What that means is that they can interpret the meaning of the survey items before they provide a response to that item. They can provide contextual responses or answers that are consistent with the answers that they provided early on in the survey, keeping in mind the context of the survey. Their behaviors can adapt. So you can prompt an AI agent to adjust their response pattern, their timing, their behavior, such as scrolling through the survey a certain number of times, etc. And last but not least, the responses that are provided by AI agents tend to be very difficult to distinguish from human participants because they look very similar to real human participants. So, why does it matter that we distinguish between the different types of fraud? Well, there are two main reasons for that. One, different types of fraud can create very different problems in your data. So, to give you an example, if you're dealing with your traditional forms of fraud, like your speeders, for instance, the issue tends to be mostly noise. These people are not really paying attention to the survey items, they're not reading instructions, etc. So your data become less reliable. However, if you're dealing with misrepresentation, the problem is different. You're now collecting data from the wrong group of people, which can affect who your findings ultimately apply to. And if you look at more of the coordinated type of fraud or AI agents, you're dealing with something even more serious. So responses that are systematically or responses that are automated, these can systematically bias or completely distort your results. Another reason for distinguishing between the different types of fraud is that if you misdiagnose the type of fraud, your solution to solving the fraud may not work. In some cases, it may even give you a false sense of security that you've actually addressed the issue. So, one example may be if you think you're dealing with speeders, you might add attention checks, which is a very common type of a check that's added to surveys across the board. But if the issue is not speeders, if the real issue is misrepresentation, those checks are not going to catch people who are simply lying to qualify for a survey. Or let's say you're dealing with more advanced cases like coordinated groups, your survey farms, your AI generated responses. Many of those traditional approaches won't work at all for them. So the risk isn't just that fraud exists, it's that you may be trying to fix the wrong type of fraud while the real type of fraud, the real type of issue continues to remain in your data. So there are a few main key takeaways from this session. One, survey fraud isn't just one thing. It can take on many different forms. Two, different types of fraud can introduce different types of risk to your data. So some types of fraud, like speeders, can introduce noise. Other types of fraud, like AI agents, can generate completely synthetic data. Three, traditional approaches like attention checks that were designed to catch speeders, your careless responders, weren't built for more complex types of fraud like coordinated efforts or AI generated responses. Four, AI agents represent a new type of fraud that researchers need to account for. One thing I want to emphasize here is that AI agents are not replacing your existing fraud. Rather, they're just adding to it. So now we are seeing a layered approach to fraud. We're dealing with both the traditional issues that existed 10, 15, 20 years ago, but we're also seeing more of the advanced ones at the same time. Lastly, in order to be able to effectively mitigate, reduce fraud, we need to be able to accurately diagnose the type of fraud that we're dealing with. If we're going to treat all types of fraud in the same way, we're likely going to misidentify the type of fraud and, in some cases, apply the wrong type of solution. So, hopefully, this gives you a clear way to think about survey fraud with fraud not just being a single issue, but a set of different types of problems that require different approaches to address. Thank you so much for your time.